The Kremlin has worked for 8 years with a New York public relations firm called Ketchum. The former government of Ukraine hired a Washington-based company called Venable. And the Bahrainis also went to D.C. for some help from a PR outfit that's called Policy Impact Communications. From placing op-eds in newspapers to recruiting analysts and writers to managing social media accounts for governments, PR firms are hidden behind more bylines and Twitter handles than you realize. State propaganda is nothing new, but in the era of 24-hour news, governments have to work much harder to promote and protect their brands. And they will always have a bunch of Western PR firms vying for that business. The Listening Post's Meenakshi Ravi now on the relationship between PR companies and governments that need their help and how they use the media to do their work.
September 11, 2013. The debate in Washington is about Syria and whether the Obama administration should intervene and launch airstrikes at President Assad's forces. The New York Times publishes an op-ed piece. It makes headlines because the byline belongs to the Assad government's most powerful ally, Russian President Vladimir Putin. The piece was arranged by a middleman, an American public relations firm hired by the Kremlin.
That op-ed came at a time when the debate over Syria policy was really raging. You were also hearing a lot of criticism by American politicians and in the media of Russian policy in Syria supporting Assad.
Putin is saying to Assad, like, look, buddy, I can save you from going to the criminal court.
So I think what the Russian government wanted was to speak to the American audience or this sort of elite New York Times reading audience directly in a way that was not filtered through either the Obama administration or the American media's spin on Russia's policy.
This article evoked a massive response. If you are Putin, this is a great way to communicate your point to a wider audience. If he was writing for a Russian newspaper, he's confining himself to the converted who know what he wants to say. Here was an opportunity to talk to a much wider audience.
It seems to me to be good that leaders are prepared to discuss what they're doing, to put their own case. They may well be lying, but that's not the point. The point is they're putting their case to the public. And the reason they do that is because today all diplomacy is public diplomacy.
In June this year, Nigerian President Goodluck Jonathan faced a different kind of challenge. The armed group Boko Haram had held more than 200 schoolgirls hostage for 2 months. Jonathan's government was facing a critical barrage over its handling of the issue, and there was an election coming. Rather than directly targeting the Nigerian media, the government took a roundabout route to deliver its message to its domestic audience, again through a PR company in D.C. and an op-ed piece in the Washington Post.
They were panicking because of the period we're in. A few months to the election, and they want to be seen to be doing something. It's good for them to try to handle the external audience. But there was nothing in that article that Nigerians had not heard before. It wasn't thought through, and I can sit down here and tell you that contract is not going to be renewed. Once after the election is gone, that's the end of it. He will not be asking anybody to go garnish his image in Washington Post or wherever.
And if you think of the governments which need to promote their brand, Nigeria or Iran or China or Russia, we're often talking about regimes which are not very open. And they're not very good at communicating. Therefore, they need somebody who would package that in a manner which would interest a particular newspaper, especially in the West, New York Times, Washington Post, Bloomberg, Economist, CNN, etc. These are elite media. So, and these are run by professional journalists. So the role of the political PR machinery is to turn that information around in a manner which would be acceptable to a professional journalist.
These people have sort of invaluable personal networks. They know how the editorial process works. They probably know a lot of current working journalists. So if you're a foreign official and you want to get an op-ed placed in an American newspaper, or you even just want to get a quote in an article about your story, again, it's worth it for you to pay whatever it is, maybe $50,000 a month is sort of a typical fee you see to have this person on retainer.
The most important aspect of what a PR agency brings to the table is an external perspective. We are more able to give them an audit on their perceptions rather than they themselves will be able to arrive. Because we work with so many different clients and different governments, we have the expertise and the experience and the relationships with the media that they wouldn't necessarily have in-house.
All of that is above board. But then there are the dark arts of the PR game, like the technique that landed Ukraine's now deposed president, Viktor Yanukovych, a Nobel Peace Prize nomination. He was put forward in an op-ed in a Kiev paper written by Anthony Salvia, a consultant working for a think tank called the American Institute in Ukraine. That organization had close connections with the Washington-based public relations firm Venable, which had signed a contract to work with the Yanukovych government in 2003. The Kremlin and its American PR agency, Ketchum, use a similar approach. Readers see op-eds written by what look like third parties, academics, analysts, all in praise of the Russian government. The writers are, in fact, recruited by Ketchum. 2 years ago, the United Arab Emirates hired the Camstall Group in Washington as consultants. The firm worked on a media push against Qatar, which is at odds with many of its neighbors in the Gulf. Camstall recruited American journalists to write about Qatar's alleged funding of Egypt's Muslim Brotherhood and ISIL in Syria and Iraq. Camstall met with CNN, New York Times, Reuters, and Washington Post, among others. The campaign was considered a success, and the firm was paid millions of dollars. Qatar also has consultants. Portland Communications manages the country's public image from its base in London. In 2011, as uprisings were taking place across the Arab world, the government of Bahrain hired a DC company called Policy Impact Group. It created a so-called think tank, the Bahrain American Council, which placed glowing articles in Bahraini newspapers about the royal family. There's grassroots activism. This is the opposite, and so PR types call it astroturfing.
I personally don't agree with those tactics. They consider them the dark arts, because I think it's very short term. And I think when you're working on behalf of a government or a client, you want to have a very long-term approach. And the best long-term approach is authenticity. Because look how negative and how damaging it is that everybody knows about the tactics that they use. It's damaging to the client, and it's a very short-term approach and doesn't work in the long term. So I would advocate strongly against using those tactics.
Now, this is an argument which every government falls for because it sounds so logical. You're a PR agency, you go to a government and you say, look at the terrible image you've got.
Nigeria's getting the world's attention now and sparking outrage.
And the president says, yeah, it's terrible. I know my country is wonderful. How come these people don't know how wonderful we are? And the PR agencies show them the newspapers. They say, look at all this negative coverage. That's where it's coming from. We're a PR agency. We can change that coverage so people will change their minds. And the logic seems absolutely impeccable. But unfortunately, it's based on two lies. The first lie is that the PR agency can change what the media says. They can't. And the second lie is that if they succeed, the media will change public opinion. It doesn't.
However, as long as governments obsess over public opinion, the public relations side of the news business will remain a growth industry, with its dark arts, imaginary and ambiguous sources, and expert analysts. And news junkies should make a habit of reading between the bylines.
More voices on